I'm Michael Trong, the Executive Director of the Chinese American Museum. We're excited to present the first installment of an ongoing program, Beyond the Page, a public program series that features contemporary Asian American authors who discuss their different experiences living in the United States. To kick off this series, we are delighted to have Richard Lui with us today, the author of Enough About Me, The Unexpected Power of Selflessness. Before we start, the Chinese American Museum acknowledges that this event is taking place across the continent of North America, also known as Turtle Island, original and unceded territories of hundreds of sovereign indigenous people and nations. We acknowledge and honor the original caretakers of the various places our speakers are joining us from. Our program this evening is held in Los Angeles, physically located on the historic village of the Yungnao in the Tobanga unceded traditional territories of the Gabalino, Shoshone, Keats, and Tongva indigenous people of these lands. To this day, there are at least 7 tribes of the Gabalino people who maintain an ongoing presence, power, and relations among their people, their natural relations, and the land they belong to. I invite you to remember the indigenous people who affirm their sovereignty and ongoing relations with the land you currently occupy, and ask yourself, how do you, your people, or your organization honor these relatives? I'd like now to thank our FCAM board members joining us in person and those watching us virtually. And a special thank you to our community partners for supporting this program. I'd also like to acknowledge that this program is taking place in person and streamed simultaneously. And I want to recognize the staff who worked so hard to put this hybrid program together. We strive to continue making our educational events accessible to everyone, where we also ask for your patience as we are testing different technologies in this new format. No matter if you're in person or joining us online, we thank you for your patience and participation today. For those who are joining us virtually, here are some things you might need to know. The program is being recorded and we made public for viewing on a YouTube channel in the future. Your video and microphone will be disabled. If you have any questions for our panelists, please send a chat to the host, Chinese American Museum, and we'll try to address them towards the end of the program. Now, I have the great opportunity to welcome our moderator for tonight's program. Paula Madison is an award-winning journalist and former Executive Vice President of Diversity at NBC Universal. Paula is the chairman and CEO of Madison Media Management, LLC, a Los Angeles-based media consultancy company with global reach. She's executive director, executive producer, and subject of Finding Samuel Lowe from Harlem to China, a compelling documentary that chronicles her journey to her maternal grandfather's homeland in China and the reconnection of her family with her grandfather's 300 descendants. Paula is also a current board member of the Friends of the Chinese American Museum. Paula, thank you for being here tonight. I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you to everyone who came out in person. Thank you to the audience who's watching online. And again, I also would like to thank everybody who worked so hard to put this program on. This is my first time back at the museum, maybe in almost a year, because of course, the limitations of COVID. But I want to take a moment. I have some information to read about Richard Lui, but before I read that information about Richard Lui, what I want to say is he's actually my friend.
Yeah.
We actually used to work in the same building at 30 Rock.
That's right.
Right, the legendary 30 Rock, where we were both journalists. And I met Richard, I don't know, how many years ago?
It was 12 years ago. We had a diversity event. And about this many people on my panel, this many people watching the panel, and we finish it, and Paula stands up as I'm walking out and says, "Hello, my name is Paula Madison. My grandfather was Chinese." And that was it. Glad, welcome to the company. Didn't tell me her title, that she owned the world. And then we really didn't, and then you left us, and which was at that point, one of the great, as I think back, I was thinking, Paula, boy, I wish I could have worked with you and learned from you at work, because I've learned so much from you outside of work.
This is the moment where I will read some of Richard's accomplishments, so you know that he's an author and a journalist, but I need to give you a bit more detail. So Richard is a veteran and award-winning journalist with more than 30 years. I don't know how that's possible. Yeah. More than 30 years in television, film, technology, and business. He's at MSNBC and previously was with CNN Worldwide, where he was the first Asian American man to anchor a daily national cable news program, and a Team Emmy and Peabody winner. I have an Emmy and a Peabody too.
I bet you got lots of awards.
No. I just wanted to acknowledge that,
Yeah.
we have something else that we're sharing.
Yeah.
He's just completed an Oscars qualifying documentary on student caregivers in military families that will hit national broadcast and mainstream streaming in late spring 2021.
And it did.
It did.
Yeah.
Right. This is old. I should have read this first. So it did.
That's all-
Okay.
yeah, it did.
In addition, Richard's 15-year business career involves a fintech patent and launching 6 tech brands over 3 business cycles. Richard has lived, worked, and volunteered on every continent. Learn more at richardlui.com. Okay, so we have to pause a bit here. When I walked up to you and introduced myself to you, I did it almost in a protective way because most people did not know that I'm part Chinese. And what I found in my work career was that sometimes some of the Chinese American and Asian American journalists, and there were never many, but the few there were sometimes suffering in silence. Sometimes there were things going on or not going on that they felt they couldn't talk to anybody about.
Right.
So I was at that point bi-coastal. I was working out of 30 Rock, and I was also working here out of the NBC headquarters here at Universal. I had been news director in New York. I ran the news department at the station there, and I became out here at NBC4. I was the president and general manager of the station, and I ran our Telemundo stations in Los Angeles. When I met you, I had become executive vice president of the Corp and was handling diversity. So you were just coming in.
That's right.
And I wanted to say to you, hi, Richard, welcome to the company.
Yeah.
I'm Chinese too.
Yeah.
And the look was, if anything gets a little funky.
And I remember that look. And it's such an important I got you look that we can give to each other. I have your experience. I see you. And in my industry, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of folks that don't see me. And she has never stopped seeing me since that day 12 years ago. And still, when we're on the phone and she says, Richard, how are you doing? And I said, I'm doing good. And she said, no, how's the Asian American male news anchor doing? Are you being seen? Every time.
Are you being respected?
Are you being respected?
Treated fairly?
That's right.
Right. Because while I don't work there anymore, I still have some influence in
Yeah.
some places.
Yeah.
Well, what we want to do is get to this topic of selflessness. And we're going to start by introducing a film, a short video to watch. But as you're watching it, and many of you here present, and I'm going to presume that many of those watching online are familiar with the concept of filial piety, right? As a Chinese construct, as an Asian construct, the obligation that we have towards caring for our elders, right? So with that as an introduction, what I'd like to do is ask that we look at this video, and then we're going to come back and have some good conversation.
Lui live at MSNBC headquarters here in New York City. Thanks for being with us today. We just have some new information on the breaking news story, the mass shooting coming out of El Paso, Texas.
I've been a journalist for 15 years.
We're going to continue next with Reverend Al Sharpton and Politics Nation. Stick around. We'll be right back. All right. Right at the last second there, Rev. You see that? I see. Oh, I tell you.
Being an anchor, you normally work 8 days a week, 25 hours a day.
Run.
Get out of here before it's too late.
Yeah, I know, man. You know how it goes. I'm not going anywhere.
Hi.
I went to my bosses and I said, you know, my dad just got diagnosed and I know where this is going. She and I came up with a plan so that I could work part-time. So I work from Friday to Sunday, and then Monday I get up, go to the airport, fly from New York to San Francisco. That's a 10-hour door-to-door. Immediately go to care for my dad.
Thank you, sir.
Fridays, I get up and I reverse the entire trip. And that's 3 times a month, about 300,000 miles a year. January 20th, we're taking a quick little walk. Say hello, Baba.
Yeah, you're so good, I told you. Yeah, you're so good, son.
It's kind of hard to talk after watching that. If you didn't follow what was happening there, in this high pressure world of television journalism, which is in fact a profit center, it's a moneymaker. Richard went to Yvette Miley, who I've mentored for many years, who was his immediate supervisor, and he said to her,
My dad has Alzheimer's and I want to care for him. So how can we do this? And she said to me, guess what?
I have some familiarity with
Yes.
that because I care for my mom.
Yes. That's exactly. And I thought I was walking in, Paula, because you know our business. You don't work part-time. Like when you were GM, you didn't have any of your own, anybody for that matter, on your team in the news gathering space come in and say, I'd like to work less. I'd like to work, 3 or 4 days a week. It's normally, we like you. When you're ready, come on back. And I expected her to say that. And it was very difficult at one moment because, it was so difficult as a person that looks like me to get a job like this. There are very few that are sitting in a national news anchor seat that look like me. But it was hard, but at the same time, I'm going to do this. I mean, he did so many other things when I was a kid to fight for me. I got to fight for this guy. I know him better than anybody. I got to do this.
There is for me, with all the years that I worked in this business, on the newspaper side, on the television side, an astonishment that, first of all, an anchor who, in almost every instances, news anchors want more time on the air, right? They want bigger show, bigger audience, more time.
Right.
To be one of a very small number of network anchors who are of Asian descent. Richard said, my dad, my family is in this bucket, and my career is in this bucket.
Mm-hmm.
And I can only imagine the fright and the fear that you must have summoned and put aside and walked into Yvette, because I didn't know that this was going to happen. And I'm not sure that I could have or would have done anything about it, but to know that you went into the boss and said, I would like to have fewer days, you can cut my salary, I still want to be on air. Most often the answer would be, no, we'll just get somebody else to replace you. You can be a reporter.
Yeah.
We can let you work fewer days, fewer hours as a reporter, but you can't be an anchor and do that. And so knowing that a corporation agreed. Now, Yvette, of course, had to push this through.
That's
she had
right.
to get fully behind it. But it starts with you saying, in order to be the kind of son I need to be, I got to do this.
I
Right.
got to do it. And, adding one more detail here, Paula, I didn't have the solution walking in. I had already written the email that was going to be sent after. That was I got to do this, but I always write my emails before such meetings. So I know what I'm sending after.
Yeah.
But I didn't know what to put in it. I merely just told her, this is what I'm living right now.
Yeah.
And since you know Yvette very well, she's a very good journalist, straight shooter. She's not going to laugh and chuckle with you all the time. She doesn't need to, because she's good at what she does. And instead, what she did when I brought it up, she was doing her thing, and then she looks over at me, drops her glasses.
Like this?
Yep. And then she says, I'm doing the same thing. I'm caring for my mom in Florida, and we're going to figure something out. You and me will come up with 3 or 4 ideas, and then let's get together. That is exactly, it was like she rehearsed it. It was so natural. And we reconvened in like a month. We had 4 ideas. She said, I'm going to try that. I'm going to try. She did
helped
it.
you piece it together.
She pieced it. She said, Richard, this is what can work. When you're ready, we'll pull the trigger. 6 months later, Yvette, it's time. And then started now, I guess, 7 years of me flying from New York to California to take care of Dad.
So half a week.
2 to 3
The
times.
commuter,
That's right.
the commuting would happen for half a week.
That's right.
3 times a month.
Monday to Thursday or Monday to Friday. Yeah.
And after we saw the video and I said I had a hard time speaking, it's because, when you get that thing that gets into your throat and you think you're going to cry, but, maybe you shouldn't. But because I cared for my mother too. When I was in New York at 30 Rock, and my mom was suffering with dementia, right? So I think there are many, many of us who have this experience, but we don't often talk about it. So let's talk about then your book.
Yeah.
Enough About Me. Now we're starting out talking about Richard because he is, after all, a fascinating person.
Not very.
But as he's saying, enough about me, right?
Yeah.
And so now the topic is selflessness,
Mhm.
right? How to move through the world being a person who's aware of his or her personhood,
Mhm.
but sometimes putting others first, right? Which is certainly what you did with your dad, and you're now doing something similar with another parent.
That's right, with my mom. Mhm.
So you still have the same schedule?
Well, less so because she doesn't have advanced Alzheimer's like my dad did. So my father would eat a donut he loved donuts. So he'd go and eat a donut every 3 hours. He loved showers. So we'd go take showers like every hour. For those of you who've lived through that, you know what I'm talking about. It's sort of this repeat. And so I knew that it was just too much for my mom. And she was there every hour, every day. And that experience, when it comes to the book, look, first of all, as a fellow caregiver, you know this. You don't know when it's happening. You don't know what to do. You never feel like you know what you're doing. You may have systems in place. You may have I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For those of you who've done it, you feel like you got it, but you still don't think you got it. But that formative experience required me to find out, well, why am I doing this for him? Why would I not do anything else but want to do this? Just clicked off some weird things in my brain, because as you know, most journalists do not write about anything. They most often will write about what they report on. So
Not themselves.
Not themselves. So they might, like I was there reporting, but they would not write a book about a value called selflessness. It's just way above my pay grade. Right? I'm not saying I'm a selfless person. What I am saying is I'm attacking this idea as a journalist would.
Yeah.
And the reason why I even thought of doing that was because of me having to evaluate what my dad went through, and now he was selfless with me, and therefore why I'm trying to be selfless with him. And then I talked to the publisher. I was like, I know this is a weird topic. She said, I'm with you. We are going to find something in this space. We need it right now. I don't know what it is. So I had a great agent that said, this is not our gangbuster book. You know, it's not going to be on Oprah or anything. But I agree with you, Richard. This is what we need right now. So we rushed it out in what normally takes 2.5 years or 3. We got it down into about 1.5 years. Because my view was we were living in selfish times.
Explain that, please.
As an anchor and as a reporter, I just saw way too much me in the number of mass shootings I was covering the last 5 years, the number of times I stood in the streets. One of my first stories was Rodney King as a cub reporter at and then I was in the streets of Ferguson. I was in the streets of Baltimore for Freddie Gray. So I got Michael Brown. Then I was there for George Floyd in the last couple of years. And I'm just seeing, and then I'm seeing all of the anti-Asian hate. And then we got to do something. We got to do something because we think I own my ideas so much I can take your life. Whoever said you could do that? And so it was not going to be a book about mass shootings, but it was. We're going to be about, all right, the little things count. I'm not writing about anything that has not been written about for thousands of years, but I am looking at it with a modern take. I am looking at it from a way of the stories in my life and that I've reported on that have taught me we can't stop looking at what we take for granted, that I will care about you because you're human. Sounds kind of silly to say that.
Well, your dad was a pastor, and your mom, when she worked, was an elementary school teacher.
UCLA.
Do you think that the combination of your parents and their willingness to give, I mean, you were born to parents who believe in giving and who taught you and your siblings to give?
Yes, they did. And the thing they did was they never preached about it. Well, my dad did. He's a preacher. So there were a couple of times my dad would go, you got to go to church, you got to believe, you got to pray. And my mom would always say this. She would say, and my mom was a choir singer since she was a teenager at True Light Presbyterian here in Southern California. And she would say, I said, Stephen, no, you have to let them make their own choice. And after that happened about 2 or 3 years, 5 years, they just lived their lives. And I think the thing that stood out for me was that we were on food stamps. We were the beneficiaries of a welfare system. And we were on food stamps. I was going to sleep hungry. Why? Because they believed that we want to be a social worker, we want to be an elementary school teacher, we want to be a pastor. I don't know if you check the salary rolls from the 1960s through 70s, and that is at the bottom of just about every measurement you look at.
Yeah.
But they didn't want it any other way. And the thing that stood out to me was my mom, she was offered many times as we were living through this time of difficulty to be a vice principal or a principal. She would come home when we were at dinner and she'd bring it up. And
Bigger salary,
yeah,
more responsibility.
she was like, no, I'm here to teach. And in her final, they said, Rose, you're so respected in the school district. What school would you like in your retirement? And she picked, because she taught K through 5, she picked the school in the San Francisco School District that had the lowest scores in the entire district. She ran towards the fire.
So how then does the child of those people who are givers by nature and they found themselves together,
Mm-hmm.
how does the child of those selfless people work in a profession that is as egotistical and driven and bullish?
Don't hold any punches, Paula.
as journalism?
Water. I need some water.
I've been my first journalism job, I was 22 years old. Started in newspapers, then went off into television.
Yeah.
I know what journalism is about. It is a me. Now,
That's right.
granted, as you
Yeah.
said a moment ago, one of the things about being a journalist is that you're not to insert yourself into the story,
Mhm.
right? So what you're trying to do is present an objective explanation of what's going on in the world,
Mhm.
right?
Factual.
Factual. But that doesn't stop
That's right.
journalists from hair, makeup, making sure I look good.
It's
How does
true.
my voice sound?
Yep.
How are my clothes? There is a meanness to it, a me-ness, not mean.
Yep.
There is an egotistical part to it.
Yeah.
How is it that you, the child of Stephen and Rose,
Mhm.
become a journalist?
I have no idea, Paula. I really don't. But she is absolutely right because as what folks will often say, the fiercely independent journalist. And that's a nice way of saying it's all about me. And I think because it was my second or third career, I think the reason why, Paul,
What were your previous careers?
well, my first career, I didn't go to college. I was a food and beverage store manager at Mrs. Fields Cookies,
Were you
5 years.
ranked number one? Your store ranked number one when you were like a kid?
Yeah, well, I started when I was 17 at Mrs. Fields on Clement Street as a counter person. And then I decided I'd almost flunked out of high school twice. And I was like, school's not made for this kid.
Yeah.
So I said, no college. I'm going to work at Mrs. Fields. Love the interface, love the cookies. So I then became a store manager for that location, and then another one, and then I got my final store. Well, one of my last stores was number 10 in the country. At the end of the day, it was number 1. We sold $1 million worth of cookies.
That's a lot of cookies.
It's a lot of cookies, and it supplied my habit of loving cars. So I was up and down from San Francisco to LA to get all my good car parts and drive back up and down, because I would also hang out with grandma down here and then head up. And was very atypical. So that was my first career. The second one was in startups and business. And then after I did business school, I invested a lot of money and time in going to business school, thinking I was going to go to this Fortune 500 company. But then I realized that's not what I wanted. And I thought about it. It wasn't like whimsical. And I don't know, there was no singular event in news that brought me over to it. It was more of, I guess I felt there were some things that needed to be said. And so a lot of my stories when I first started at CNN in 2005, it's okay if I go here.
Go there.
Is that I would not pitch an Asian American Pacific Islander story except for one every 2 years.
Why?
Because you know what I was thinking.
I'm ready. Tell the
Yep.
people.
There goes the Asian guy pitching the Asian story and
Pigeonholed.
and, growing up looking like this, right? You're already pigeonholed for many other reasons.
Yeah.
And so one of those stories, though, was about Paper Sons.
Wow.
The one every 2 years. I remember I stood in that tracking booth. The tracking booth is where I have the microphone and you talk in. It was a 6-minute piece.
You're recording.
Recording your voice
Yeah.
for the piece. I stood in that tracking booth for 6 hours. I wanted to get it right.
6 hours.
6
So your
hours.
story couldn't have been more than 3 minutes.
It was a 6-minute piece on top of that. I got them to say yes to that.
Wow. That's an accomplishment.
Yes. And it is one of the most favorite stories I've done as a journalist, because it was not only about, and when I go back and I look at this story, it's not only about me, it's about America. You know, the final line of the Paper Son story, which you're all very familiar with, is my character, Erica G. And Erica, who doesn't read Chinese, my final line, which I was looking at, and you know, the final lines of these stories we sweat about because it's like the final, this is what it is. And the final line was that Erica goes to visit her grandfather to a tombstone that has his name, his fake name in English and his real name in Chinese.
Wow. Wow.
One of my favorite stories,
Well,
because I'm a Paper Son grandson.
and my family's legacy, our Japu goes back to the year 1006 BC. So we didn't have any Paper Sons coming out of Guangdong province, but we didn't come the way of the West.
Yeah,
We came east through the Caribbean.
Jamaica.
Jamaica, yeah. So, Richard, this concept of selflessness, because I struggle with Eastern and Western. I struggle with this, right? And when I say I struggle, it's because the philosophy of a pope centuries ago who looks at the world and says to Portugal, you get to explore half, and says to Spain, you get to explore half. It's Roman Catholicism. I went to Catholic school for 12 years. Roman Catholicism that has the Pope looking at Catholics and dividing the world in half. And the Spaniards hired an Italian. The Spaniards were Ferdinand and Isabella. And they hired a guy named Christopher Columbus to go to India to find spices and silks. Well, he got lost. He went the complete wrong way and ended up in what we call today the Caribbean. And he saw people, he was like, oh my God, Indians. No, not Indians. You were supposed to be in India. Those are not Indians. And so somehow they're called West Indians. Now, I measure that against the history of Zheng He, the Chinese explorer who had scores of ships going out.
That's right. Huge ships.
Huge ships.
Biggest in the world.
Biggest in the world. And what did he go out and what was he charged with doing? Bringing back interesting things to the empire. So the emperor and the people could see peacocks, trees, fruit, not going out to conquer for God and country, land and people. Philosophically, it's very different. It's very different. So I started out by talking about filial piety, right? A responsibility to care for one's parents.
Yeah.
And I remember coming out of the 10 Commandments, honor thy father and thy mother. My sense is
I guess my dad got his wish.
I think so. I think so. But again, you were growing up in a family that believed in that, but surrounded by communities that only paid lip service to it, right? Because we started out by talking about selflessness and selfishness and how we got to where we are today. And I wonder, as I talked about the struggle that I have, the Eastern philosophy, the Eastern part of me says, I absolutely will care for, I must, it's in me. And the Western part is, well, it's my turn now, right? Sure, you raised me and I'll be as helpful as I can be, but it's my life now. How in your exploration of this totally different
Mhm.
ends of the spectrum, who do you find, as you were talking to these people and researching this story, what are the dominant traits that you discovered? And talk about the frequency or lack thereof of the concept of selflessness among the people who you encountered here in North America.
In North America. I approached the book, it's part memoir and part self-help book, right? So I've put together a lot of things that generally when you're in the refrigerator and you got a little bit of this and you got a little bit of that and a little of that, and you're going to make something of it. Well, my little of this and a little bit of that, I love self-help books. I wanted to do an anti-self thing, and I wanted to talk about narrative, or really a narrative that was of an Asian American Pacific Islander that when you got the opening, right, you got to take it. And I did not want to leave that narrative as part of what is our narrative. But when I looked deeper, it was actually instructional as to why I goofed up and why I think the way I am doing things. Why do I share the story in the opening chapter about me calling my dad when I was doing my audition at CNN, my first ever audition? And I call him, and in the book I say, there goes the three letters coming up in the neon, C, N.
Intimidating.
Yes, and I'm standing in the hotel room. I just arrived because I was working in Singapore at the time, and I was tired as all get up, but I had to call my parents. So I called them. I don't know why. I said, "Hey, I'm here. And guess what?" I didn't tell them this yet. I'm going to be auditioning. I'm going to become a news anchor. I'm not going to do this business thing anymore that I just spent a lot of money, 3 years. Then I have a job, all tucked away. And I wasn't sure what the reaction was going to be when I had this call and I was looking at the CNN thing. And my mom was like, "Oh, all right. Well, you okay. Who you are. You got to do it. You sure now? You all right? Okay. I'm giving the phone to Baba now." Hands the phone over to
That's
Baba.
not a very Chinese mom thing to say,
I know.
by the way.
Well,
I'm going to lay that out
Well,
there.
remember the high school thing
Yeah.
for the elementary school teacher, and
Yeah.
her son
She was
almost flunked
amazing.
twice.
Right. Wow.
So
That's not my mom.
Oh yeah.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. I got lucky. And then she handed the phone over to my dad. I told him, and I wasn't sure how he was going to react. And he just started laughing. And he said, "You were always a different kid, Richard. I dropped you, didn't I?" No, he didn't say that, but
On your head?
they did drop me, by the way. But the thing was, they showed a way of support and serving without making, and I think it's just because I'm number 3 of 4, that maybe they did that for number 1 and 2, and then for 3 and 4, they kind of said, okay, they're going to be who they're going to be. We will live and act the way that we know is right. And hopefully they will see this. Well, fast forward 30 years, and all the kids in their own way saw the light.
Mm.
I know my mom's happy because she's got to be, wow, all of them stopped what they're doing at different times and in different ways and took care of my dad, and then now is taking care of her. So being selfless and the selfless things that we do, and the book doesn't say we have to be Mother Teresa or Desmond Tutu, but we do it at the same time. It's just that we equate selfless actions. As part of my research, I was looking at Americans, and I surveyed 1,200 of them, and I asked them, to be selfless, does it mean a complete change in your life, a complete sacrifice? 91% thought that. But when I asked them, can you also be selfless in small ways? Similar numbers said, yes. Those are two opposite things. One saying it's a complete sacrifice, other saying we can do something every day.
Small acts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or what we think is small.
Yeah.
The small act that we've been talking about is Yvette Miley.
That's right.
Her small act was just,
we'll work it out.
Let's find something.
We'll work it out. Sure.
And so that's the importance, and I think the idea of what I try to go through in the book And it's 1 + 1 = 3 is what I say. I realized that if I hadn't gone through this journey, I would be not who I am today. I would not have written this book. I did a documentary on young caregivers, age 7 to 26. I would not have done any of these things. I wouldn't be sitting here with you and know you as well as I do. And so I think that the idea is east or west or what have you, it all happens and we just have to dive in. There are some unintended benefits that I write about in my research there. You do look better if you're selfless. You do make more money, about 50% over a 14-year course. And you do live longer, about 4 years.
I found
Get
that
moving.
fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, I find that fascinating, right? Because I think that we generally think that in order to be successful, you have to be bullying and run over people and money grabbing and all the above. But what I was amazed by buried in those statistics is that factually, the people who are kinder and more selfless
Yep.
end up being the ones who have better financial security and emotional stability, growth, happiness, right?
And there's some limits though.
Yeah.
First of all, I talk about it in the book, which is you can't be like what I did with my dad growing up. As I said, he says he's a pastor, but he lies. He's not very good at talking, even though he's a preacher. He is not always on time. He is not always genuine.
You mean he's human?
And so I walked away from the church saying, if that's what these leaders from the church are, I know you agree with what I'm saying, being a church girl, is that I didn't come back to the reality that, no, my dad is a great guy, but he is super, super human.
Yeah.
Meaning it's not super like superhuman,
Yeah.
but very, because you know what he did along the way, like my mother, but my dad even more, is he would often describe how he got it wrong, but how could I get it better? And one of those things that he even said when he had Alzheimer's, if he met you and if he forgot your name, he would go, Jane, I'm sorry, I can't remember your name. I have Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's dementia folks don't consciously want to engage in the fact that they are living through that in a way that is so conscious at the same time. And that, I think, was really helpful as, you know, I was thinking through the mental health challenges now that I can talk about that, because you as a caregiver had mental health challenges. You and I have talked about this. I've had them. I don't know what they are exactly, but it's the first step that I got to say, yes, I don't know if I was okay. I don't know if I am okay, but that's okay. Sometimes it's not, and sometimes it is.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm just grateful for their imperfection.
There's room for it.
Yes. And that was the lesson, I think, as I've gone through my career in life.
Right. Okay, so what we're going to do is see if we have a few questions from the audience. Does anyone have, oh, Denise?
Richard, you talk about the concept of selflessness, but I'm also guessing that that doesn't mean foregoing self-care, because you probably had to be in your best form, literally working every single day of the week, balancing work in New York and work in San Francisco. So what types of things did you intentionally put in your schedule or design for yourself to take care of your self-care?
So the last 2 years of my self-care have been horrible. But the years before that, because it's been a long journey, well, there's self-care when it comes to mental wellness and physical wellness. Physical wellness, probably last 2 years, not so good. Previous to that, the previous 5 years, I was very deliberate in making sure that I exercised, making sure that I ate well. But on the mental wellness side, I didn't know I was doing this, but I was trying to be as frank and as honest with the real question that I was often asked, which is, how are you? And even now, in the last 2 years, I think my mental wellness, I'm going to the mind gym a lot more in the last 2 years. Now, when you go and work out, you can work out at home, you can go to the gym, go in the streets, but you got to work out. So I got a little rubber tire in my belly right now, right? But I also have a little rubber tire around my brain, and that's okay. I got to go and just work it out. And the issue, I think, with taking care of myself to get rid of the rubber tire in my brain was to be as honest and as vulnerable as I could, not thinking as, oh, I got to be vulnerable now. No, it was more like, I got to be as honest as I can about this with this person if they're ready. And I can always tell if you're ready to hear the answer to the question. And then I'll go. And then if you're still there, I'll go more. I was famous, beer number 2, I'm crying like crazy. Well, meaning that I want to tell you what's happening. But in general, I think what we all can do is do 2 things based on the question you're asking about. One is really mean the questions that you ask of others.
Meaning that how are you is not a throwaway.
Yes.
Don't ask how are you if you're not prepared to hear it.
That's right. Say hello instead.
I agree.
And when you're asked that, and if you ask that and somebody's giving you an answer, you owe them to listen. Not to be an expert, but to listen. The one thing as journalists are taught to do, but we don't do very well, unfortunately, is listening. But in all the stations that you've run and all the journalists, we got to listen twice as long as what we're used to doing right now, because we all love to talk. We all feel like we have the right to talk. We have the right to tell other people what we're thinking, that other people must listen to it. And because I got all these handles, got to let the world, stop and listen first. And I think the reason that we lose the importance of that goes back to that perfection of our selfishness, that we think folks got to listen to us. One thing about taking care of ourselves, and I write about this very purposefully, when my dad finally could no longer talk and eat, because Alzheimer's just eats away like a stack of pancakes, and then after that, it'll take away your ability to breathe and all sorts of things. And we could no longer care for him, so we had to go into a care home. And then my mom, it was the toughest choice, but I knew when she said it was okay, she was saying, I can't anymore, and we can't anymore.
Yeah.
And then I saw what it had taken from her. She was not the IQ, EQ master that she had been her entire life. Why didn't I see this along the way? I goofed up. But what told me that she had reached that point, and it was close, that's when we started to say this to her, that she had given so much, was we had Nest cameras so we could help watch to see what happened. So it wouldn't be our mom trying to recount what had happened to 4 of her children, right? That's just like, okay, well, this happened and that. So we'd had the cloud cameras. I write about the scream. I call it the scream because I heard her scream at my dad. And his scream was not only of anger, it was of pain, it was for help, and it was of sadness. Your family members when they have the scream. And that's when we doubled our efforts. And that's also when we knew that my mom had given too much. And so I purposefully wrote about unmitigated selflessness. There is a limit. There's a limit. And us caregiving folks, and how many caregivers are here sitting with me? You know what I'm talking about. You like, but if I don't get guilt, and it's tough to be able to step back. And that's why I purposely wrote about the scream and purposely wrote about unmitigated selflessness. I put in a questionnaire and a scoring system and the whole 9 yards, as a good journalist would, about how to understand your personal story. I know you asked a very simple question and I went on for about 45 minutes, but it's a very important question.
It was important. It was good. Okay, so there was a gentleman in the back, but we have a question from Zoom, and then I'm going to go to the gentleman in the back. What is your full Chinese name?
So my full Chinese name is Lu Yongshi, if I'm saying it properly.
Okay.
Even though I'm Cantonese, I'm saying it in Mandarin because that's the class that was available for me.
Okay.
And it's called, do you know what it means?
No.
It makes me laugh all the time. Anybody know what Yongshi means? Brave poem.
Oh, nice. Okay. I like that.
My grandpa somehow knew. I don't know.
Your grandpa named you?
Yeah. He gave me my Chinese name right here on Vermont and Los Feliz when we stay with them. And my mom said, okay, Richard's taking a Chinese class. He needs a Chinese name, please.
Yeah.
And so I got it when I was like 12, not when I was born.
I got mine in 2012 from my uncle, Chao Wu, who I'd only just met. He was 88.
That's awesome. And
Right.
what was the name?
Lo Xiao Na. Lo is our surname. Xiao is our generation name. All the girls in our family. It means happiness or laughter. And Na is my given name, and it means beauty, which particularly for African-American women, I love to tell them that, because we grow up in this country believing that we're not beautiful, right? And there was my Chinese uncle.
He's pretty cool.
Oh, yeah.
He's okay.
Yeah.
He's all right.
Right. Okay, did you grow up speaking any Chinese or Cantonese? So no, not Cantonese, because I just learned, you just said you studied Mandarin.
And even then I took my first Chinese language class in high school, and I took Chinese 1 and I failed, took it again and then passed. Took Chinese 2 and failed, took Chinese 2 again and passed. Then I went to City College then I worked at Mr. Fields. Then went back to City College of San Francisco, go Rams, and I took Chinese again. I took number 1 and failed, took number 1 and passed. Took number 2 and failed, took number 2 and passed. Then, hang on a second, then I go to Berkeley. Guess what I do? Took Chinese 1 and failed, took Chinese 1 and passed, took Chinese 2 and failed, took Chinese 2 and passed. And I'm obviously not the sharpest tool in the shed because I'm still running into the wall trying to do this. And then what happens is I asked my Chinese teacher from Beijing, and she knew I was struggling, this poor Chinese man, he's just so horrible. He can't get it right, And I said, can you write a recommendation letter? I'd like to study in Tianjin. And she looked at me and went, well, your characters are horrible. You can't read them. The only thing you got is that when you read romanization, it sounds okay.
So I have a different take on this. And it is that you are relentless. And I see that as a positive characteristic. You failing does not say to you, I should give up. You failing says to you, I'm going to conquer this. And I think how proud your parents must have been. Nobody wants the kid to come home with an F.
No.
But to come back again and to say, I'm not going to give up. I mean, how amazing, is that of character to be in high school, first of all, and do that over and over. And then, and I'm going to do it in college. And I mean, back then, if I'd known you again, I would hug you and say, Richard, you're such an amazing person. All right.
Paul, the reason why this was back to because I didn't write the book necessarily about I have a unique view because I'm Asian American of Asian descent. But the reason why I kept on taking those courses simultaneously as backup, I was taking Spanish, by the way. And that was very straightforward, and I loved it. But I was Chinese. And I couldn't, I mean, come on, I had to try to do this.
Mm,
It'd been different if I was French,
mm,
then but I was Chinese.
Yeah.
And I was Cantonese or Mandarin or any other
Yeah.
dialect or language. If it was from China, I was going to try to do it. But I couldn't.
So when I was in China and they showed my documentary on television and they did a story, and there were 33 million Chinese who watched it on CCTV4. And what I walked away with was how many people were so proud that I, who do not look Chinese, who I don't speak any dialect of Chinese, but that I know that I'm Chinese and I wanted to go home to connect with China. That was wildly applauded there.
And here.
And here, yes, and here too. But my point about this is your motivation, I am Chinese and I want to learn to speak. Your motivation for that goes back to, again, your sense of family, ancestry, who you are, and how you present not only to the world, but to yourself. So again, I mean, Richard, I'm already married. I'd marry you. I love you. Have you been to your family village in China? And if so, where is it? And then we're going to go to the gentleman in back.
I have not. I got close. There's many times that I went to China where I was not allowed a visa because I'm a journalist.
Mm.
So when they did open it up where you can have on-site tourist visa within a certain limit, I could not go. It was just in Guangzhou in the south.
Yeah.
My father's village, not my father, my grandfather's village was outside the zone. And where my mom was born, because she was born there and came when she was 5. Where she was born, the building was torn down. The shop house was torn down.
Yeah.
And I walked there with 2 Chinese students from Sun Yat-sen University over there, and they were kind of my guide. And I was like, you know what? I got to do this properly. I'm here because I happen to be transiting, and I told the 2 students, I'll be back. I want to do this properly because I think it's important to tell. And so I kind of finished over those 2 days, Paula, and then I said, okay, that's where the building's supposed to be. It's not, and I haven't been to my grandfather's village, who was the poor Chinese farmer. And my mom was actually, her roots are from the city, so she's a New Yorker, basically.
Yeah, sure.
Or her mom and her dad were. So no, I don't know fully. I just know it's in that area, and I do want to dig into it. It's definitely on my list.
I can help you. Let me help you do that. I got connections in China.
We might be related.
We could be. Then I couldn't marry you. So we have a last question in the back.
Did your siblings ever suggest that maybe you spend less time taking care of your father? And if so, what was that dynamic? Or if not that, then how was that dynamic, sharing, help, caring for your father?
We have had more deep discussions in the last 8 years than we ever have in our life. And there are good times and there are bad times, but I will underline that even the bad times are in the end going to be good, because we're learning things about ourselves that I think my second documentary is called Hidden Wounds. And I make a point in the film, because it's a story about my family as well as 2 other families who are going through family caregiving and a mental health and a mental wellness journey, that I say at the end of the day, and so my father passed in December. And what I would say to people is, in the end, I think he would be happy that the things that have happened during and after turned out more good than bad in the end. I mean, look what he got me to do. He got me to write a book about selflessness. I think he's laughing all the way to the bank. And so, yeah, we have not been always singing from the same sheet of music. As all of you who are caregivers know, that's just not the way it works. But at the end of the day, it'll be better for all of us. Maybe not now, but it has been that way. We've argued about everything from finances, how we care for my mom, how we care for my dad, who shows up when, who doesn't show up, who's giving more, who's giving less in time, who's giving more, who's giving less in money, all these things. And because my parents, especially my mom, who was the political leader in the family, would say, all four of you need to agree. You must agree. Because when she grew up, her siblings didn't agree. Her siblings here in Los Angeles were not, people would do whatever they wanted and they would not tell anybody else. So I appreciate that about her, that she quietly was saying, you must work together. You must find a solution together.
I have two older brothers. My mother said, I don't care where you live, how old you are, the three of you must stick together. And the people who we married had to realize that they were marrying that person and two siblings. It wasn't at the same level, but my mother's statement was, one money, she said, three monies will do more than one money. And so we were taught to pool our funds and buy brownstones in New York and invest together and all the above. So and we don't always agree about everything, but when it comes to family, we're there. And we're there for each other, the kids. We were there for our parents, all the above. It is just the way it has to be. Otherwise.
And I think if we were to summarize our conversation and what we've been saying is there's some things that are explicit and those that are implicit. And the values that we've all taken in from our experiences, and selflessness is just the same. There are times we are implicit and there are times we are explicit.
Right.
The issue is we tend to do more things that are explicit. And that first story that I talk about with my audition, the closing line is that it's not because first of all, I didn't get the job. And it's because when they were playing the tape, I was sweating. Is what I said. I was sweating. I was nervous. And I was like, I was doing this to wipe off the sweat. I was, doing some of these, and punching in the air and doing ahs and oohs and stuff like that. And I talked to my agent and my agent goes, well, you didn't get the job. And I said, you know why? I mean, I did fine. I was on camera. I handled the breaking news test. I read the prompter good and everything went fine. Why didn't I get the job? And what else happened, Richard? Well, I worked it out, I was stressed, but I did all these great things off camera, it's this this is my method, right? And my agent goes, well, that's why you didn't get the job. The executives care about what you're doing actually off camera more than on, because it shows where you're at.
That's right. That's right.
And that's why I started the book with that audition, because my point about the way we do things, the stuff off camera is more important.
When people aren't looking.
That's the most important.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned your latest project called Hidden Wounds. We have a clip that we're going to share. And then when we come back, we're going to wrap this up, and then I'll bring Michael back to say the farewell. So let's see Hidden Wounds.
Hi, I'm Richard Lui, live at MSNBC headquarters here in New York City.
I'd been a journalist for 15 years, and then my dad got diagnosed with Alzheimer's.
My son Richard.
Good to see you too. It was a lonely road until I found others.
The oncologist said that it looked like somebody had taken Kate and dipped her in cancer.
We know he struggles with PTSD and traumatic brain injury. The VA actually considers him 350% disabled.
Of course, I have an Afghan flag in here. Constant alertness, watchfulness, inability to sleep.
Sometimes he wakes up crying.
Anger and frustration and rage at times. boom, that's it. My mind was a mess.
In this house, we say the word cancer, cancer, with a little lilt in our voice, but
he knows. He knows that something's not good.
I'm Richard, your son.
Truth is hard, it's scary. Courage is being okay with that vulnerability.
So much of our struggle goes unseen.
When we talk about hidden wounds, we're often talking about mental health conditions.
You're facing a new emotional challenge, aren't you?
I'm not ready to be a single parent.
I will do whatever it takes to stay with him as long as I can.
If you recognize me, blink once.
You only get one of these in a lifetime. Libby?
The reason that I can carry on, it's because of family, community, and love.
When will we see that?
We're still, this is an early edit, but it'll be November 2022.
Yeah. Well, I want to say here and now that I could not marry you because I'm probably old enough to be your mother. However, I do want to state publicly that I think you're an extraordinary person. And when we have in our midst regular, ordinary, extraordinary people, we should always stop and acknowledge them and thank them for being such amazing examples and reminders to us that we're all part of a bigger whole, that it is not just about me, that it is about, I'll use the term, a godliness that it's up to us to extend to each other. And we're living in an era where that's not necessarily highlighted. But my parents always said, leave the world better than you found it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, Richard, I just want to tell you, you are absolutely doing that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you.
Michael.
Thank you, Richard and Paula, for being here today. Am I on? Okay. Thank you, Richard and Paula, for being here today. You know, I think you talk about selfishness, and I think vulnerability today that you shared is really about selfishness. So thank you so much for sharing your stories, and thank you, Paula, for contributing.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Michael and Cam LA.
Thank you. And I want to thank the audience, both in person and at home, for joining us for tonight's program. The museum is celebrating the 26th annual History Maker Awards Gala, and is returning to the Western Bonaventure for a delightful and elegant event on September 28th. So please visit our website to get more information about our history makers. But before we finish the program, for those on Zoom, we'd like to continue our Camp Family tradition of taking a virtual group photo. Staff, please allow the Zoom viewers to turn on the cameras. Even though we might be cities or even countries apart, we want to capture all of us sharing the virtual space. Thank you for joining us.